There comes a silence every year, a silence that descends on the heart of a believer when the month of Muharram begins, a quiet remembrance, a heaviness that words often fail to carry. Because it is not just about history. It's about pain, about sacrifice, about the raw truth of faith tested in the most brutal way possible. On the day of Ashura, the earth bore witness to an event that will echo until the end of time. It wasn't merely a battle. It was a line drawn clearly between truth and falsehood, dignity and humiliation, principle and power. And it was our Prophet, peace be upon him, who told us that his beloved grandson would one day stand on that very line. He once held his grandson in his arms, kissed him and said, "Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein." What does that mean? It means Ashura isn't just a day of mourning. It's a mirror held up to our hearts. Who do we stand with? What do we stand for? And how much are we willing to give up for the truth? The Quran reminds us, do not think of those who are killed in the way of God as dead. Rather, they are alive, with their Lord receiving provision. This verse, mentioned in the chapter of the family of Imran, was not just about any group of people. It was about those who live for truth, who die with dignity, and who do not trade their principles for power or safety. The Prophet had forewarned the Ummah. He had foretold what would happen to his family. When he cried, holding Hussein as a child, it wasn't because of a momentary emotion. It was because he saw what was coming. He saw Karbala. He saw the thirst. He saw the loyalty of a few and the betrayal of many. And yet, he didn't stop it. Not because he couldn't, but because the message had to be proven by blood. Because truth sometimes needs to walk through fire to show its worth. What happened on Ashura wasn't a story for textbooks or documentaries. It's a wake-up call. A reminder that being on the right path doesn't guarantee comfort. That standing with justice may leave you alone, but never abandoned by God. That even when 72 stood against thousands, they were not the weak ones. Because faith gives a strength the world cannot measure. And for those who wonder, how do we honor this legacy? Do we cry? Do we fast? Do we learn? Yes, we remember. We fast on Ashura, following the Prophet's practice, not only because of the historical significance tied to Moses and Pharaoh, but because the Prophet wanted us to keep this day alive in our hearts. He said, fasting on this day expiates the sins of the previous year. But alongside this spiritual benefit, he left us with a deeper responsibility to never let the truth be forgotten. Ashura is not an isolated tragedy. It's a torch. It is built on the foundation of Talmus Ali, Mihi Allah, Kalailum, May Allah. And it whispers into the soul of every Muslim. If the Prophet's grandson could give everything for the truth, what excuse do you and I have? Truth was never meant to be easy. It was never promised to be popular. It doesn't change to fit the world. It challenges the world to change. And when a person truly embraces truth, they begin to realize that it comes with a weight, a responsibility, and yes, sometimes a price. Not everyone will celebrate your honesty. Not everyone will stand by you when you refuse to bow to what is wrong. That's why those who cling to the truth are often left standing alone. But if you study the lives of the prophets, if you reflect on their path, you will notice a pattern. The moment they stood for truth, they were tested. The Prophet Nuh stood for over 950 years, calling his people to the truth. And for most of that time, they laughed at him. Ibrahim was thrown into fire. Musa had to face a tyrant. Yusuf was abandoned, then imprisoned. And our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was mocked, slandered, driven out of his home, and faced war after war. Not because he was harsh, not because he was wrong, but because he refused to remain silent while falsehood prevailed. Truth has a price, and the people of Karbala knew it. When Hussein made the choice to face Yazid's tyranny, he did not expect comfort. He knew what it would cost. He knew he was walking into death, but he also knew that remaining silent would cost something far greater: the integrity of the message his grandfather had delivered. That message could not be bargained with. It could not be diluted. It could not be used to justify oppression. And so, he stood, knowing well that his stand would not save his life, but it would preserve the truth for generations to come. Truth is not always rewarded in this world. Sometimes it will cost you your peace, your comfort, your reputation, maybe even your relationships. But the believer doesn't live for applause. The believer lives for the pleasure of the one who sees everything. Every tear, every silent moment of courage, every decision to walk away from what's wrong, even when it's easy to stay. He sees it all. That's why the Quran honors those who die for truth, calling them alive with their Lord, sustained in ways this world cannot comprehend. Because when you pay the price for truth, you're not losing, you're rising. You're being written into the same pages as the most beloved souls, those who chose light when the world went dark. And on that day in Karbala, when the tents burned and the dust settled, Hussein's body may have fallen, but his truth stood taller than any sword. Everyone wants ease. Everyone wants a life where things fall into place, where peace is uninterrupted, and the road ahead is clear. But that's not where faith reveals itself. Real faith isn't exposed when everything is smooth. It's exposed when the path becomes steep, when the water runs out, when those you love are taken away, when you pray and the situation doesn't change, but you still choose to kneel. That's when faith shows its face. Karbala stripped away every illusion of comfort. It wasn't a moment of strength in numbers or strategic advantage. It was raw. A man and a handful of loyal souls standing in front of an empire that demanded their silence. Not their opinions, not their allegiance, just silence. Just a quiet surrender to injustice. But they refused. And that refusal, though it came with thirst and tears and blood, was the most powerful act of faith. There's something deeply spiritual in what Hussein and his companions embodied. They didn't wait for a miracle to arrive. They became the miracle. Their patience wasn't passive. It was active. They chose principle over protection. They chose truth over comfort. And when the night came, the night before the final battle, they could have walked away. No one would have blamed them. But each one of them chose to stay. Not because they expected to win in this world, but because they had already won with their Lord. Faith, when it's genuine, isn't just in the words we say. It's in the pain we carry for His sake. It's when you do the right thing, even when it hurts. It's when you pray while your heart is breaking. It's when you give, when you barely have enough for yourself. And in those moments, you realize it's not about being seen by people. It's about being seen by the one who knows the weight you're carrying? Who knows how heavy your chest feels? Who knows how much you've lost and how much you're still holding on? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever seeks chastity, God will make him chaste. Whoever seeks self-sufficiency, God will make him self-sufficient. And whoever remains patient, God will give him patience." These words are not light. They were lived on that desert land. They were lived in the cries of children and in the silence of a man who stood with unwavering dignity while the world fell apart around him. Ease isn't the reward of faith. Faith is what holds you upright when ease is nowhere to be found. When the Prophet held his grandson in his arms and said, "Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein," it was more than love. It was more than a grandfather's affection. It was a declaration, a powerful, timeless truth, that the path Hussein would walk years after the Prophet had left this world would not be separate from the Prophet's message. It would be the message lived again in the harshest of conditions, written again in sacrifice and sincerity. This connection wasn't just about blood. It was about legacy, about purpose. The Prophet didn't raise his grandchildren in luxury or remove them from struggle. He brought them close during prayer. He carried them on his shoulders. He let them witness how submission to God feels even as children. And when he cried, holding Hussein, it wasn't weakness. It was the weight of knowledge. He saw the road ahead. He saw what Karbala would demand. And he knew that his grandson would carry the banner of truth when others would drop it. This love was sacred because it wasn't based on convenience or comfort. It was rooted in truth. The Prophet once said, "O Allah, I love him, so love him and love whoever loves him." When he said that, he wasn't just pointing to a child. He was anchoring the Ummah to something deeper. That to love Hussein isn't about words. It's about understanding what he stood for. The Prophet's love was never shallow. He loved with purpose. He guided with clarity. And that love became a compass for anyone trying to understand what loyalty to the message truly looks like. When you think about how much the Prophet endured for this faith, persecution, exile, hunger, then look at Hussein and you'll see the same thread running through both lives. Both stood against oppression. Both called people back to truth. Both were offered shortcuts, deals, compromises, and both refused. Because truth doesn't bend, not even to survive. It stands tall, even when it's surrounded. It walks forward, even when the world turns its back. There's something heartbreakingly beautiful in how the Prophet's legacy was preserved. Not by armies, not by rulers, but by a grandson standing under the sun, with his family behind him and betrayal in front of him, still holding on to the dignity his grandfather taught him. That kind of love is not ordinary. It doesn't fade. It gets passed down through tears and prayers and remembrance. Karbala was never meant to be a distant event in our history books. It wasn't just a tragedy frozen in time. It's a living message, a lesson that doesn't expire, a reminder that speaks to every heart that's ever been torn between doing what's right and doing what's easy. It's not about names and dates. It's about choices, the kind that define a person's soul, the kind that separate those who stand with truth from those who watch it fall. Every generation needs Karbala, Because every generation faces its own Yazid. Sometimes that Yazid isn't a man. It's an idea. It's silence in the face of injustice. It's turning away when someone's dignity is crushed. It's justifying wrong because it's convenient. And when those moments come, Karbala stands tall as a mirror. It doesn't ask who you admire. It asks, what will you do? The beauty of what happened in Karbala is that it didn't need numbers. It didn't need grand speeches or political power. It just needed truth, carried in the hearts of a few who refused to bow. A small group, a handful of men, women, and even children, standing against a force that thought it could erase principles with pressure. But what Yazid never understood is that when faith is real, it doesn't break under force. It becomes stronger, sharper, deeper. This is why Karbala isn't just a lesson for the oppressed. It's a warning for the comfortable. Because when you're tested, it's not always going to look like a battlefield. It might look like a workplace, a friendship, a screen, a decision behind closed doors. And in those moments, it won't be about how much you know or how loudly you speak. It'll be about whether or not you choose to remain upright when it's easier to stay silent. Our Prophet taught us that the best of struggles is to speak the truth in the face of a tyrant. That's not poetry. That's Karbala. That's the moment when Hussein stood, knowing full well that no army was coming to save him, and still he stood. Because sometimes victory doesn't come in the form of survival. Sometimes it comes in the form of sincerity. The people of Karbala weren't just brave, they were awake. Their hearts were alive. Their souls were lit by something the world couldn't understand. And when a person lives with that kind of clarity, even death becomes a step forward. When you hear the name Hussein, it's not just a name. It carries a weight that your heart feels even before your mind understands it. Because what he stood for wasn't theory. It was pain lived with dignity. It was truth held in bloodied hands. It was love for God that refused to be shaken, even when every comfort was stripped away. That kind of legacy doesn't demand attention. It commands the soul to reflect. Ashura isn't just about remembering what happened. It's about remembering why it happened. What drove him to stand when he could have stayed silent? What made him carry the children, the women, the few loyal men, not to safety but to a place where he knew death would meet them? It wasn't grief that brought them to Karbala. That's why this day is not about sitting with sorrow alone. It's about asking yourself, deep down, away from the noise, who am I becoming? What have I compromised without even realizing it? Where do I stand when no one's watching? Ashura calls you inward. It pulls at your conscience. Because grief without growth is not what Hussein wanted from this ummah. He didn't leave behind a memory. He left behind a responsibility that you and I must look in the mirror and ask, have I stood for truth even when it's lonely? Have I defended the rights of others when it costs me something? Or have I looked away because it's easier? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said the ummah is like one body. If one part is in pain, the whole body responds. But sometimes we go numb. We scroll through suffering like it's noise. We hear of injustice and say, may Allah help them, while continuing life untouched. Sasuhafata na, wikem nunya, kitanu, ateira, irati, hapinika, eliti, elai, haram nasim, ba, baharam mahala, maham nasim, bahaya, Namata, mohigait saya, mahalakir, Allah, bahasahaha, malaka maser. That's not what Hussein died for. He died so truth would never be forgotten, so injustice would never become normal, so future generations would remember that Islam is not just about rituals. It's about courage, about principle, about walking away from what's wrong, even when everyone else walks toward it. Ashura invites you to rise, to feel, to let the story enter your bones, not just with tears, but with change, with a heart that whispers, I can't be the same after knowing what they gave. The Prophet fasted on the day of Ashura, not because it was part of some ritualistic calendar, but because it held meaning, deep, layered meaning. When he arrived in Medina and saw the Jewish community fasting on this day, he asked why. They said it is the day God saved Moses and his people from Pharaoh. The Prophet replied, we are closer to Moses than they are. And he fasted. That alone tells you something powerful. This day is not bound by tribe or lineage. It's tied to truth, to struggle, to liberation through faith. And still, years later, it became the day his own grandson was killed, the very bloodline through which his legacy would continue. The day the earth drank the blood of the prophet's flesh and blood. That contrast, it shakes the heart. A day once known for deliverance became a day soaked in sacrifice. Yet the Prophet never told us to abandon that fast. He didn't say, grieve instead. He didn't say, change the focus. He taught us to keep fasting on Ashura, to seek forgiveness through it, to remain spiritually connected even as the pain remains real. Because this is the essence of our faith. Holding grief in one hand and hope in the other. Crying over what was lost while clinging to the mercy that still remains. Fasting on this day isn't just about abstaining from food. It's about quieting the noise, softening the heart, remembering that purification isn't always through ease. Sometimes it's through hunger that we learn what truly fills us. And when that hunger aligns with remembrance, with the ache of Karbala sitting in your chest, it becomes worship. It becomes a way to honor them, not by repeating their pain, but by renewing our faith. One fast, one day. The Prophet said it erases a year's worth of sins. But what kind of fast is that? The kind that comes with reflection, with sincerity, with brokenness that seeks healing, not from the world, but from the one who sees the heart beneath every act. That fast is not just a shield, it's a bridge, a return, a whisper of, I haven't given up. Even when the Prophet stood in prayer, he would cry for his ummah. His love was heavy, his concern was real. He wanted ease for us, but not ease without purpose. He wanted us to turn back, to rise again. That's what fasting on Ashura does. It's the soul bowing even when the body is weak. It's telling your Lord, you see me and I am still yours. Let this Ashura be different. Let it be more than a day. Let it be more than a day. Let it be a turning point where truth becomes more than words, where faith becomes more than ritual, where love for the Prophet means living by the values his family died for.